Okay, great. Well, hello to everyone and welcome to tonight's edition of The Great Movies, a discussion of life itself, the life of Roger Ebert, a documentary from 2014. And before we get into that discussion, my name is Andy Warburton. I'm delighted to be joined by my partner in crime and co-host Darnice Jasper. Darnice and I are both librarians at the Anne Arundel County, Maryland Public Library System, which sponsors this program. Now, our next virtual meeting will be on Friday, April the 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern, April Fool's Day, the perfect day to discuss Beat the Devil from 1953. I'm not going to tell you anything about this movie and would suggest that you know as little about it as possible going in. You will probably be thinking, what is Andy doing picking this movie? But I think it'll be a fun discussion. So let me put the link into the chat and you can start signing up for that event on March the 17th, 18th, March the 18th. And so if you are new to our discussions, and I think we might have maybe one or two new folks tonight, we are so glad to have you along. And if you'd like to join our email list, please send me an email at awilberton@aacpl.net. That way you'll get all the news about our upcoming programs before anyone else. And I could put that in the chat, but I feel like Darnice is probably way ahead of me, as she usually is. Also know that we want as many people participating tonight as possible. So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your real or virtual hand or use the chat feature and Darnice will work you into the conversation. We also ask that you please mute your mic if you are not speaking. Okay, so I emailed everyone this summer's audience choice schedule, but in case you missed that, here it is. And they're all on Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern. So we will kick off the audience choice summer on June the 3rd with M from 1931, starring Peter Lorre. July the 1st, Bicycle Thieves from 1948. And on August 5th, Hunt for the Wilder People from 2016. Now, we'll also be doing some other movies during the summer, but those are going to be our audience choice, basically first Fridays, just like we typically do here. So really excited about these titles. You guys picked some really good stuff. So that's going to be a fun summer. One last announcement for you before we get started. And I think some of you, especially the local people, have maybe attended this event in the past, but I wanted to let you know that the Annapolis Film Festival is coming up in person this year, and it's running from March 31st through April the 3rd, 70 films in 4 days. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the screening committee for the festival, and I'm really excited about many of these films. So I hope that you'll take a look at the schedule and see what you think. And let me put that in the chat, and that's something that you can take a look at later. And there it is. This is the 10th year of the festival. It's really made many strides during those 10 years. And it's definitely worth going to. You can find a movie or two, or if you could buy a passport, you can watch pretty much anything you want to. It's a good cost. Okay, I think that's it. Any questions before we get into the discussion? Okay, seeing none, let us go ahead. So tonight's movie is based on Roger Ebert's book, also called Life Itself. It's not in our library it's only in our library as a downloadable audiobook, but you can get the print version through Marina. I always wanted to meet Roger Ebert, and although I never got the opportunity to do so, he has been a huge influence on my life. I was 16 years old the first time I saw Ebert on sneak previews with Gene Siskel, and I was infuriated that Ebert didn't like a movie that I had just seen and loved, a film called Magic from 1978, starring Anthony Hopkins and Anne Margaret. Ebert named the problems with the movie, and I was determined to watch the film again to prove him wrong. I saw it again, and I realized that Ebert was right, and I was wrong. That was my first experience with Ebert. One of the ads for their later show, Siskel and Ebert at the Movies, had a Chicago Tribune truck with Gene Siskel's picture on it with the words, read Gene Siskel. Then Ebert waves over another truck, this one from the Chicago Sun-Times, which reads, trust Roger Ebert. I did trust Ebert, and I felt that every time I watched the show, he was teaching me a course in how good movies worked and how bad ones didn't. I bought his movie yearbook each year, as well as several of his other books. I named this and our in-person program, The Great Movies, based on Ebert's 4-volume set of Great Movies books and those corresponding pages from his website. I attended Ebert Interruptus in Boulder, Colorado, even though Ebert was no longer running the program, just to get a sense of what he might have been like at that event. As we know from tonight's movie, Ebert began as a journalist, but the movies really spoke to him. One of the first quotes from the movie goes like this: "The movies are like a machine that generates empathy." And Ebert displayed not only empathy, but also passion, a fierce intelligence, and a sense of wonder. When he talked about Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, he could have been talking about many films when he said, quote, "The fact that the story is set 35 years ago doesn't mean a thing. It had to be set sometime, but it was made now, and it's about us." Movies were personal to Ebert, and I know that they're personal to us as well. As you also know from the movie, Siskel and Ebert went at it. We'll get to that relationship and more during our discussion. I mentioned that this was going to be a difficult and an emotional film to watch, and it is, and not only for the medical and rehab scenes. There's also Ebert's relationship with Siskel, his wonderful marriage to his best friend Chaz, and much, much more. Ebert's legacy is tremendous. His website is still thriving. Ebert Fest and Ebert Interruptus are both ongoing. Most of his books are still in print, and his wife Chaz is CEO of Ebert Media, which includes RogerEbert.com, and Chaz is also the host of Ebert Fest. I'm going to stop talking because I could talk about Roger Ebert all night, but I want to hear your thoughts on the film and your thoughts about Ebert himself. Okay, so Darnice, who is going to get us started?
I don't know why. No one has their hands up. Okay, Bill Snyder, go ahead.
Well, I certainly didn't know nearly as much about Ebert as you did, Andy. And I certainly learned a lot. It was a little painful at times to watch, but what I learned, one of the many things I learned, I had no idea that he had written a movie, and I wondered if he had reviewed that movie, what he would have given it, because it wouldn't have struck me as the movie he would have been the writer for. But kind of amazing that his life, all the things that he was involved in, it was quite an eye opener.
Good. Thank you, Bill.
Okay, who's next? Yeah, well, I think everybody had a notion about why he liked that movie. He certainly seemed to say it, including there was a woman that had a umbrella at the end when they were doing that little tribute that there was something in there. Mm-hmm. Okay, Jackie, go ahead.
I gotta say, this was a good pick, guys. It is everything I would expect and hope for a biopic, right? It didn't have a heavy documentary style or anything, but it was a good story, and you got things you didn't expect. You got things to admire. You got things that were cringeworthy. And I think it shows a good, by having the scenes, the rehab and the other scenes all the way through the end, because sometimes they stop, right before the end. I think that really did put the thing in a much fuller perspective. And it's an excellent choice. There may be other biopics out there that are as good, or more famous people, or people famous for different reasons. But this was an excellent choice for a good movie. Good call.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. I agree. Susan?
Okay. Yeah, I actually saw this movie a few months ago just because it happened to be on I don't know if it was on Amazon or Netflix. Anyway, I was bored and it looked like an interesting movie, and it, it was really shocking to me at first to see the effect of his illness. But when I watched it a second time for this event that we're doing tonight, I started to really pay attention to his love of film, and there was a Errol Morris, I think, had a little clip of him. I don't know, you know who Errol Morris, who did a lot of documentaries, and he said that Ebert was, if it wasn't for Ebert reviewing The Gates of Heaven, he would have had no career at all. And I remember that review. That's like 44 years ago. And I still remember I used to watch Ebert and Siskel. I mean, it was like religious. I don't think I ever bought any of the books. I bought the Malton paperbacks, and I used to read them from A to Z. I don't know if I ever got all the way through all the movies, but anyway, so that just shows you what power that show actually had over, if you could remember something that far back.
Yeah, thank you, Sis. Just really quickly, I lived, and I don't know about other people, but we never knew when Siskel and Ebert was going to air, because I lived in a small town in the South, and it just came on or it didn't. But for me, it was always great to hear about movies like Days of Heaven that never made it to anywhere near where I was. And I knew the only way I would be able to see those was on VHS back in the day, if it ever came out. But if it hadn't been for Ebert, so many people like me that lived in small areas that didn't have theaters that showed that type of film would never have known about those films. So I always appreciated him.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I agree. Yeah. And it was funny because you were talking about watching him at the movies, and I only knew him from sneak previews because I lived in New Jersey and they didn't show it for that same reason they were talking. There was a lot of the shows you might be able to get every once in a while, but up until sneak previews, you really didn't get the chance to see them. So it was great to have that experience. I had the same experience you did. Before I go to Bruce and John, Odie mentioned in the chat that he actually did review Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So Odie, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Roger, he didn't quote unquote review it. He wrote an essay about it. He said, I can't review it, and then he proceeded to review it. You can find it at rogerebert.com. If you search for it, he wrote a whole piece on the lunatics running the asylum, is what he said about making that movie. So he did do a review of it. Gene gave it half a star, by the way.
I'm not surprised about that. Thanks, Odie.
Yeah.
Okay, Bruce.
And Gene Siskel actually spent like $7,000 buying the John Travolta suit from Saturday Night Fever, because that was his favorite movie, which always put Gene Siskel in a very interesting light for me. That's his favorite movie. I'm not quite sure if I can trust a lot of his things. One benefit of being related to someone else who is involved in this group, I can bounce a lot of ideas off of Ethan, and hopefully he can with me before we get here, and sort of coalesce thoughts into something that, I don't know, resemble sane musings. I really like this. I thought it was interesting to see a documentary. There's some really, really good documentaries out there, but I didn't think that would fit in with the theme of the great movies. But as I told Ethan, my first reaction, well, it's a long movie, and I'm not one to like long movies. So my plan was to watch half of it Wednesday night and then the other half Thursday night, and I couldn't stop watching it. It was that enthralling for a documentary, no less. But as I told Ethan, it was more than a documentary. It was a story about about brotherly love. It was a story about loneliness. It was a story about aging. It was a story about dying gracefully. It was a story about so many things other than the life of Roger Ebert. It was about life as it, and it just all happened to happen to Roger Ebert. And I sort of exemplified by that quote he said in the beginning, where he felt that he was born into the movie of his life. And I thought that really encapsulated what this movie was about, which, you know, if you think about the directing and all of that stuff, I thought it was done superbly to get that message across.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I agree. A very powerful documentary, and on so many levels.
Gotcha. So I see John, then Bill, then Ethan.
I agree with much of what's been said. I have to say, though, I never watched Siskel and Ebert ever. I didn't really care for them at the time, but I think this documentary really captured something that was really vital back in the day, which is this movie culture. They mentioned Pauline Kael and Andrew Sarris and kind of make it sound as if they were butting heads. And they were. I mean, Pauline Kael wrote what ultimately became a book-length essay on Herman Mankiewicz's role in writing and producing or creating Citizen Kane to pretty much knock the legs out from underneath the auteur theory, which Sarris was a big proponent of, and I think quite effectively. I don't think that really accounts for all the greatness of a movie, but I think it has a lot to do with it. I mean, for instance, I don't think Michael Curtiz is an inherently great director, but I think Casablanca is a great movie. So there are a lot of other elements that went into making it that way. But I think one of the things for me, there was a very strong nostalgic feeling, because I remember back then when movies mattered. I mean, you couldn't wait for the next Truffaut or the Chabrol or Bergman. I mean, there were a host of great filmmakers making films. And I just don't get the same feeling today. I could be just out of it. I'm not really into Marvel or Star Wars or Star Trek, whatever they are. But I was really into the kinds of movies that would appear routinely in the cities that I lived in, mainly Washington and New York. On another note, one of the things that really struck me, and I don't know why necessarily, I've never been a huge fan of Werner Herzog, but I recognize his importance. But I was really moved by the two, at least I think it was two segments that he appeared in, especially at the end there when he's looking at the star at the ground. I mean, I never knew Herzog was capable of such profound and deep feeling. And I think that's one thing that film really does well when it does it, which is convey in a way that no other form that I'm familiar with can, that kind of feeling. And I thought it really was very moving. I was moved almost to tears by it. And I was surprised to see Herzog appear, first of all. And then secondly, the way he spoke, I just thought, wow, this is really, really, this made the film worthwhile to me in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you,
good
John.
points.
A lot of good points there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we've got Bill B next.
Bill, you're muted. There we go.
I think like a lot of people on the Zoom tonight, and Andy, I go way back with Ebert and Siskel and Ebert. Watched them pretty much from the beginning of when they started, and read the great movie book that you pointed out, and seems like countless of his reviews over the years. This movie makes me want to read the memoirs of life itself. I did. It was a really interesting approach, I thought, to sharing this life of Ebert, who obviously had his flaws, but was very human and was a brilliant writer and even a bit of a cultural and social philosopher. The guy that made the movie actually was the guy that made Hoop Dreams, and that was the one that I think Siskel and Ebert both loved that film. They were really, as was pointed out earlier, they often championed little films that would never have gone anywhere if they hadn't put them out there. And I think this was a special tribute to from that filmmaker to do this piece. And I think he did a really nice job with it. I was reading too that his initial approach was going to be when he first started the interview process with Ebert and was going to make this film. Ebert was still very active in the film community and getting out and doing a lot of speeches, et cetera, and putting things together. And just as they started filming, he had the thing with his back, and they discovered all these cancerous lesions and everything. And he had trouble walking after that. And so he changed his approach to more being about incorporating how Roger was dealing with approaching death. And I do feel like that gave I think the film would have had a lot of depth even without that. Rogers led a very interesting life. But this whole thing with how he was gracefully and sometimes not so gracefully, but dealing with his upcoming death and the optimism he had, and this beautiful love story with his wife, Chaz, who it seems like really kind of came out of nowhere to rescue this guy on a lot of levels. He had been obviously going through a terrible bout with alcoholism, and it really does seem like they both found the love of their life there. I thought it was a very life-affirming film and very well done on a guy that's meant a lot to me over the years.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The way the film is structured is so well done, and I do believe Chaz literally saved his life on many levels, and her story is tremendous too. We could have a documentary about her and the things that she's still doing. So thank you. Okay, who's next, Darnice? And you're muted.
I'm muted.
Darnice.
There you go. So Ethan, Margaret, D, Jeff.
Okay.
You're unmuted, Ethan, but I can't hear you. Can anyone, is it just me?
No, he's I don't know what it is.
Now you're muted.
Yeah.
Nope. Can't hear you.
Ethan, maybe log out and log in.
Yeah, we'll catch you on the way back.
We'll get you in a minute. Okay, who was after?
So
Ethan?
then we got Margaret.
Okay, Margaret.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Margaret.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you all. So I'm in Chicago right now. So it was lovely to see the views of the city and Tim talking about some of the bars, which I had been in my youth. So that was kind of fun. But my favorite thing was the stories that they told and how they connected with people. Like when, is it Anna Duvernay? She was talking about how her aunt took her to the Oscar rehearsal, and there was this picture and she sent it to Ebert, and Ebert like responded with something kind of glib, like, yeah, we're a lot older now. But then the next day he put it in like a blog, which was awesome. Like that was one of my favorites. And then the story about the puzzle that I don't think I got this right, but it was like Alfred Hitchcock gave it to Marilyn Monroe, who gave it to Laura Dern, who gave it to the director of the Pushcart, who was like supported by like Ebert. Like I thought that was so cool how like everybody's connected and supportive of each other. So that was like my favorite takeaway.
Yeah, that was a great one. That was a great one, Margaret. Thank you. Those are my favorites too.
Yeah. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, D.
So like so many people, I felt that Ebert was a big influence on my movie watching. I used to watch sneak preview all the time, but I stopped when the pissing contests and ad hominem attacks just got too unbearable.
Mm.
And I had found it really frustrating because I loved their comments about the show, but I just couldn't watch this ridiculousness. And many years later, I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and a friend told me that the Conference on World Affairs was about to start and that Ebert would be leading his Interruptus. And I was really hesitant to go because he was such a mean jerk. I had seen it on TV. But it was amazing. So you would sit in this giant auditorium and he had, these were films on, on tapes or whatever, on the real films. And he had a machine where, so it went on, I think for 5 days. The first day you watch the whole movie. And then the rest of the week, he would start at the beginning of the movie. And anytime it moved him, he would stop the movie and talk. He might rewind to show a scene again. And it really was true that anyone in the auditorium could also yell out, "Stop." And he would stop the movie and let them say something. And he was delightful. He rarely was mean to anyone. If somebody needed shutting down, he'd shut them down. But he was just delightful. And and I should mention, just by luck, that year it was Citizen Kane. And so that was wonderful. And I always wondered why he was so delightful to us when on TV he was always such a jerk. And watching the documentary, at some point I thought, oh, he probably, it was probably like when he used to hold court in the bars. Only now, instead of a bar full of reporters, he had an entire auditorium of people hanging on every word, and it was wonderful. I remember 2 things he told us that I'm sure everybody else already knew, but I had never given them a thought. He did tell us that if we ever saw a fruit cart in a movie, we should expect that at some point there would be a chase that would go right through the fruit cart and everything would go flying. And even told us that if we ever saw a fruit cart in a movie he was showing, we should yell out, "Fruit cart!" And the other thing is, he pointed out that that we should expect that whenever there was an outdoor city scene at night, the streets should be wet, as if it had just stopped raining. And that the reason for that is because wet streets look really good on film. So those were just a few things that I remember, but it was really cool seeing the documentary and kind of putting it together.
Thanks,
That's great, Dee.
That is
Thank
wonderful.
you so much.
Yeah, and I want to hear more about Citizen Kane sometime.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's fantastic.
So I think Ethan's mic is back, so we're gonna go to Ethan
Okay.
and unmute. No,
Oh,
no. Can you act it out like pantomime?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Hey.
Okay, there we go. Excellent.
Okay.
What a wonderful documentary. I knew of Roger Ebert, obviously, but I knew he led an interesting life. But wow, this is something that I would show to someone who didn't even like movies, who didn't even care about movies, because it's just so entertaining and so accessible. I love a lot of the things that you guys were saying. This guy's life was incredibly interesting, especially what you guys were just talking about with screening the movie and then spending 4 days picking it apart. That sounds so entertaining. I would love to do that. And just Chaz, everything about Chaz, she was the heart and soul of this movie. Every time she was on screen, I was just smiling. Her presence made everything better. One very, very interesting documentaries obviously rely a lot on editing, perhaps even more so in the narrative features. And one thing that I thought was very, very interesting that Life itself did was a lot of its edits between archival photos were dissolves and face morphs, a lot of them. And that was very, very interesting. It always kept you focused on Roger Ebert's face, which I guess maybe part of the reasons why that's interesting is because like his face has changed post-surgery. I wonder if they want you to focus on what he looked like then, what he looked like now, and see them as the same person. But anyway, I wanted to draw attention to this very, very specific face morph that's about 2/3 into the movie that I love. It's around the time that Siskel dies in the documentary. And it's not the narrator. Roger's talking about how affected he was by the death of Siskel, and he looked back on their partnership, and he realizes just how much he appreciated all of the fights, just having someone to spar with, and he missed that, and he really wished that he was told about it. And all while he's saying that, while he's saying he's changing his perspective on his relationship with Siskel as something that was an annoyance to something that was treasured. What's on screen is a extremely effective face morph between two magazine covers, and they're both. It's not just his face; it's Siskel's face as well. Both of their faces, they're in the exact same position. Siskel's doing a thumbs up, and Roger's doing a thumbs down, like this. Siskel is smiling, and Roger is not. And then that morphs into the exact same picture on a different magazine cover, except this time Roger is smiling. And that morph happens right as he narrates for himself that he realized how much he loved sparring with Siskel. And I thought that's one of the most effective uses of editing I've ever seen in any documentary ever, because the visuals of that just so perfectly drive home the point that the audio is trying to make. And I probably won't rewatch this for a long time because I got all the information and I'm satisfied with this. But between now and then, I would just rewatch that cut because that is an amazing use of editing.
Thank you, Ethan.
Great point, Ethan. Fantastic.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but I was focused on, I didn't focus on the smiling, but I did focus on the dissolves into the face, and even the ones where he was doing the, as he was aging and all the different friends. That was a great editing shot, and I appreciate that. So thanks, Ethan, for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, Jeff.
Great discussion so far. Some good points. Really enjoyed this. I've been a fan of Ebert for years, like going back well into the Siskel era. Just on a personal level, the parts with him towards the end of his life in the hospital cut pretty raw for me. But I'm very happy that was in there because it really it tells you a good illustration of end of life like that, and it's an unbelievable amount of courage that he had at that last bit of his life. I did want to talk about his relationship with Siskel because you didn't really see as much during the time of the show as now sometimes after the fact that you're seeing some of the outtakes and that where they were really, really going at each other. And it's so much an illustration of two smart alpha dogs, bullheaded alpha dogs going at each other. And most of the guys on this call will recognize the way guys are with each other, and how affection takes the form of abuse, you know, and if I'm ragging you, it's because like I have affection for you, and that is totally what I saw with those guys. Like you thought they were going to tear each other's head off, but there was definitely an affection there, and that is very much a male thing, and it was kind of fun to see it. On a personal note, as far as Ebert as a movie critic, when his great movies feature started on his website, that was absolutely like marked on my calendar. It came out every other Sunday, like usually in the evening, and like almost to the minute, I would be on his website and checking it out. And if I look through my pantheon of movies, there's so many in there that I came to probably through him. Stuff like Night of the Hunter, or he had a great love for Fellini, like 8½, and the Dolce Vita. I know those ones for sure. There's countless, and so anybody that wants to learn about classic film or great movies, go to that website and just start working your way through that list, because it's just a treasure trove of great stuff. I pulled a little excerpt out of a review here, because he doesn't. I never thought he always got his due as a writer, not so much like Cale or Saris did, but Roger was a great writer. And I just want to read a little excerpt here from The Player. He goes, "It's about an industry that is run like an exclusive rich boys' school, where all the kids are spoiled, and most of them have ended up there because nobody else could stand them." Now, I just busted a gut when I read that, and I could well imagine Robert Altman reading that and having the same reaction. So that's the kind of writer the guy was. He is accessible, funny as hell, and true to the mark.
Thanks, Jeff. So many great things you said. And I'm glad you mentioned Ebert as just a writer, not just a writer, but as a writer, which he was a tremendous writer. And I still read those reviews. There's probably very few days that go by that I don't go to rogerebert.com and read one of his reviews. They're just amazing. He was such a good writer and knew how to speak to people. And as some of us have already said, he knew how to speak to people in a way that this film that they may not have thought was for them, whether it was a Bergman or an Altman or a Herzog, after you read that review, you were dying to see that film. And not many writers can do that. Okay, who's next?
So we got Chuck and then Jan.
Okay, well, like a lot of people have said, Roger Ebert has been a big influence on my love of film as well. Growing up in the Chicago area, I would buy the Sun-Times every Friday when the new releases were coming out, because I wanted to read his reviews. And he was great at reviewing really great movies, and I love those reviews, but he was also really great at writing bad movie reviews that were highly entertaining, that I really enjoyed. Obviously, he wrote a lot of them were collected in a couple of books that were put out, but I really enjoyed reading the bad reviews as well as the great ones. And of course, I loved the great movies segment he did. Yeah, there's the book, right? Yeah, there you go. But yeah, there's a couple of things that I really stood out that maybe haven't been mentioned yet. I really kind of like the narrator who kind of was the voice of Ebert, Stephen Stanton. I thought he really did a good job of getting his kind of cadence down, and that was really interesting, because for a moment I was thinking it was Ebert's voice, but that was good. And I also liked some of the comments and the complexity of the relationship between Siskel and Ebert from Siskel's wife. I thought she provided some really interesting insights from, obviously, she was kind of the voice of Gene's perspective, since he wasn't there to be able to talk about the film, during the film. But anyways, so those are a few things I liked. And one of my favorite Ebert quotes was that they didn't mention is, "It's not what a movie is about, it's how it is about it." And that's kind of something I always kind of think about when watching movies. So just my take on it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, okay, Jan, and then Wale.
This is a great discussion tonight, y'all. I think this is a very moving documentary, and I learned a lot more about his wife, Chaz, in this. Andy's right. She saved his life and made him a better person, a better film critic. She reminds me of what Boris Karloff said about Val Lewton, that what did he say? He said he rescued my soul in those films that he made with Lewton after he endured some of his Poverty Row days. Like Andy, I grew up in a small market for movies. And so Siskel and Ebert were something of a lifeline for me when it came to overlooked films or films that had not been appreciated yet. I still remember like it was yesterday when they discussed a little film called One False Move. It was 1992, it was 30 years ago. I had never heard of the film. It was not coming to my town. It was too small a film, but I could drive to the nearest bigger city to get a chance to see it. But the love that Ebert had for championing that film and hoping that his comments would give it wider release and a wider appeal to people, those were powerful moments. And he was such a good writer, like Jeff said. I went back and checked, and Ebert, along with another critic named Richard T. Jameson, who writes for Movie Tone News in Seattle, they were the only two critics that I could find who caught something when Chinatown came out in 1974. They caught the essence of that film in a moment. There's a throwaway line where the actress who is playing the false Mrs. Mulray calls up Jake Gittes, and she says to him, "Are you alone?" And Gittes says, "Isn't everyone?" Ebert caught the significance of that, and it's the opening sentence in his review of that movie. And I can't tell you, everybody here, I can't tell you what it meant to me to read his review and feel validation that something that had affected me as a film goer in 1974 had also affected a critic like him on that same level. Like a lot of you, I would have loved to have met him in person.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you, Jan. Oh, so many
Jan.
great memories you have there.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Wale next.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So I always saw Ebert as one of the critics who was approachable. I felt his criticism was, he used easily accessible language rather than some of the pretentious language you hear critics use, like very easy. They use some of the very easy terms like, "Oh, that movie took itself too seriously," or you'll hear highfalutin words like mise en scene, however it's pronounced, But Ebert managed to make his movies, his reviews, accessible. I was moved by the movie. I was moved by how many people he touched. I'm as big a cynic about marriage as you'll find, but this movie, was like the best argument, one of the best arguments you'll make if you were debating me about marriage. So thanks for thanks for recommending it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wale. I was mentioning Kathy said she didn't really know about them and thought the arguments were fake. I agree. I always thought that it was a publicity move, right? Obviously, they were rivals. They really had, and seeing the vitriol in their eyes and hearing it in their voice in those voiceovers and those the outtakes, I was really thrown. And it's funny. I always wondered why they were positioned the way they were, and why, because Siskel was always sitting up top and Roger was always sitting bottom, and I always thought, oh, isn't that a power move? And the fact that a lot of those decisions were just coin flips just blows my mind. Like that kind of, odd just changes the dynamic of the whole thing. So I appreciated hearing that. I also appreciated hearing, Anna DuVernay talk about the experience, because it's one of those, you never know whose life you impact or, whose life you affect. And the fact that he was impacted by that as well and remembered that to me was really, really a wonderful moment. And I thought it was hilarious about, how she identified with him, and like, he married a Black woman, he knows what this life is about. And so I just thought that was funny too, because I never even thought, obviously I never thought about that either, but it just made me laugh. So
Yeah. That's
oh
great.
yes, you took your mic off. Were you gonna say something?
Sorry, I didn't
No, it's
know.
okay.
There's no thing to raise your hand on my thing
Oh, yeah,
because
that's
of
fine.
my. I guess I'm a ringer here. I actually write for RogerEbert.com. Roger hired me 11 years ago now, in 2011. So I got to meet Roger. I got to spend time with Roger. I got to be mentored by Roger. And some interesting, and I saw this movie at Ebert Fest when they showed it in 2014. I saw it at the New York premiere, and I interviewed Steve James for the site about this. As I didn't want to watch it again before we did this because it's kind of a hard movie for me because I know where I was when Roger died. And but I watched it again. It's very well done by Steve James as expected. And it's very interesting that Roger wanted to, and he's told us this, us, the far-flung correspondents, as he called us back in the day, that he wanted to be open about everything because Gene was not. And so that's why you get those scenes of his procedures and things like that. And I like that the movie looked at his morbid sense of humor. But one thing I do want to point out is Roger, he was the first critic online. So he was a huge techie, and I'm a programmer. I work in Silicon Valley. So a lot of times when Roger and I would talk, we talked about what was going on at my job. And he didn't necessarily understand the technical aspects of what I do, but he asked journalist questions. And I always liked being interviewed by Roger about why my demo blew up, as opposed to talking to him about movies in general. I mean, he used to assign the movies to us back before, he retired and passed. And he would come up with, he just wanted someone to write about. So he wanted to hear your voice on a particular movie. And so he would assign us. It wasn't like, I'm going to assign you like the Medea movie because he just said, one time he assigned me a movie about raccoons. It's a documentary about raccoons. And he said, well, if anybody can make it interesting, it'd be you. What the hell am I going to say about raccoons, Roger? So it was very interesting in how he mentored us and how he was just such an open-hearted, he promoted you. The first thing he wrote on that pad when I met him, he wrote, I tweeted you today, and it was 2010. I had written a piece on Tyler Perry with my occasional co-writer, Stephen Boone, and we do this thing called the Black Man Talk. We go back and forth and we talk about a movie, and we have these back and forth volleys. And he tweeted it, and like 20 million people went to my site and crashed the blogger. But he was a very open. If he liked your writing, if he wanted to hear what critics from around the world were talking about, he promoted it. And I think that was one of the best things about him, was that he allowed, not just for movies that you didn't see, but also for people that had voices in other countries, he promoted them on the site. So we became this big family of people from Poland and from India and all these other places, and he put this stuff on the site, Korea. And that was one of the more fascinating things about Roger. He was also very, very funny, and his emails usually 1 or 2 lines, so it wasn't he's being glib, it was just Roger's thing. And it always would say cheers R. And when I would see it on the screen tonight, I thought about all the times that I saw that cheers R. Or if he tweeted you, he would send you a message and it would say tweeted, and then it would say /EOM and then Roger. And I think the /EOM came from his Apple. It didn't come from Roger. But I'd always look at it, and that was like when he tweeted you, you felt like, and also when he emailed you or he talked to you, you felt like you just belonged to him. There was nobody else in the universe besides that. And I told him I didn't like Beyond the Valley of Dolls. And I also told him that when he disagreed with Gene, more often than not, I sided with Gene. So I figured he would fire me, but then he told me that so did Chaz. Chaz actually liked Gene's reviews more than Rogers, but she met him.
Wow.
How's that pretty?
That's my little 2 cents on Roger. He's still missed to this day, and I'm honored to continue to write for the site, even if I am reviewing Medea.
Somebody has to.
That's right.
I always do. I don't mind it. Just in honor of my mother who loves Medea.
I love it. Thank you, Odie. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy that you're able to join us too. And I know how difficult it is because it was hard for us to watch and we didn't know him personally.
And we didn't know him. Yeah, and you did. And thank you for sharing those great memories about him. And we're so delighted to have you with us tonight.
Okay, so I see any other hands. I see Sue and then Bruce.
Well, I thought everything was beautiful. I love Ebert, and I'm not as into all of it as every one of you are, but it was fantastic, and I love hearing what you all say and your background. I have this place where in the time that he was at the Sun-Times, I worked for another Marshall Field publication. It was like all a big family, the Sun-Times, the Daily News, World Book Encyclopedia, and I worked for a publication of theirs, which was very profitable. And we had a staff of maybe like 6 or 7 guys and 2 women. And most of them were journalists. Most of them had been at the Sun-Times or the Daily News. And I got to know this whole circle of reporters. And it was really a fantastic time for me because I wanted to be in publishing. And people told me, oh, you'll never be. Because remember, in the 60s, there weren't very many women trying to do something like that. And I managed to get a job as an assistant editor, which was a Girl Friday, executive assistant, do whatever. But I really had a lot of working with many authors that worked on our book. And I did a lot of manipulation of the manuscripts, and it was an exciting time. And in that time, the Sun-Times, the newspaper era was incredible because we had the most famous person, of course, was Ann Landers, which was the big draw. But there was also Ebert, but Mike Ryoko, Sidney J. Harris, famous names that were fantastic. And the literary scene and the near North Side was an exciting place, like O'Rourke's. There were so many places that you would find this culture. And now I think about how exciting that was. And I never ran into him in a bar, but I know the scene. And I just wanted to say, to sort of share that nostalgia, because I never realized really how different that was from now. I mean, I'm certainly sure in the Washington Post, there's a scene where you're with people that, you know, all of a sudden are doing all these cool things, but that was the scene then. And it was a scene of creativity and of inspiration and people coming in from everywhere to the city and making their mark. Oh, I know. Second City was just becoming really huge. And so it just brings me back to that and the environment that cultivated that sort of craziness that you could actually let loose and do things like this. And nobody seemed to be too concerned that it was a bit weird. It was a moment for things like Ebert. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Sue, so much. And then Bruce, right.
2 quick things. When people earlier were saying, you know, they really wish they had met him, they really wish he had met him, I was thinking, you know, I liked his reviews. I thought it was a great movie. I don't know if I would have wanted to meet him because I wouldn't expect him to be what I would expect him to be in real life. It's sort of that, you know, meeting your heroes type thing, although I wouldn't say he was a hero. But I would sort of, you know, I've met some people who have some degree of fame and notoriety, and yeah, okay. But actually listening to Odie talk, I'm like, wow, he was a more genuine person than he might have come across in some of the review shows, not in the documentary. So there's a thank you for humanizing him with that. But I do have to say, and maybe I learned this from movie critics, there are great movies that you can like and don't like, and there are just some bad movies that you like them because they're entertaining. They don't have to be important. They don't have to have a message. They can just be fun 90 minutes. And I have to say, Diary of a Mad Black Woman is one of those movies for me, Odie. I can't really drop that movie. It's don't discount having to review them, right? It was fun.
I don't discount, right? I actually take them on because a lot of critics don't take them seriously. I mean, I review them like I review any other movie, even if they're, not very good. It's just someone made this movie and it has an audience that it just doesn't so happen to be me. It happens to be, old church ladies, but I get some entertainment out of Medea because she reminds me of people in my family. It's almost like I watch those movies so I don't have to visit those people.
Right.
That's why I don't watch those movies. But good point, Bruce. Jeff?
Yeah, one thing I meant to mention in my first go around, which I didn't come to me. If you consider the breadth of Ebert's career as well, I think he started reviewing movies in '67, which was absolutely the sweet spot of American independent movies then. He was there for people like Scorsese, for people like Altman, Coppola, all those people, Hal Ashby. So that was a time when that was what you saw at the big theaters, like it's not like going now where it's like 12 different Marvel sequels, like great independent filmmakers were at the vanguard of what you saw in the theater. So he was the right guy at the right time, it seemed like, too, because there was just so much riches in the theater then. So
yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? I know that this was a movie about Roger Ebert, but can I just say how weird it was to know that Siskel was always at the Playboy Mansion, and all of those images of him like chilling like a fake Playboy. Though that
Who knew?
It gave me such a different perspective of him that I just didn't want to know.
Yeah, it was the first time I learned about that. It was like a real eye opener as well. Like,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. No, it has not aged well at all, Susan. You're right. Odie.
He was a sports writer, just like Roger. He was actually the sports writer at the Tribune before he became the film critic. So he was running around with a lot of athletes. It's kind of funny that Gene's wife says that Roger wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but Gene kind of lived Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And I thought that was a very entertaining little snippet of information about about that movie.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, and that Chevy Chase scene was funny because maybe that's the persona that he gave off, is that he gave no F's, as the kids say. I mean, just like, I don't care if you're sitting right next to me, I'm going to tell you this. And yes, I love a number of your movies, but this wasn't it. And I mean, he was right. It wasn't a good movie at all. It's one of those, you just watch it because it's funny, but there's no good depth to it. So yeah, I appreciate that. That was funny. Anyone else have a comment? Anyone else? So I sent this to Andy, but there were a lot of references to a lot of movies in this documentary, not even just the ones that he, talked about, but some of the ones that were hidden in the background or were mentioned in passing. And so it was really good to even pay attention to that too. Bill B.
Yeah, just one quick thing that I found of some interest. Of course, there was a reference to the voice actor that played Ebert doing some of those line readings. and he was really good. He sounded a lot like Roger Ebert. But I read in one other review, actually, Washington's own Ann Hornaday, who's was claiming that some of those actually were the voice that he did his own reading of the audiobook of Life Itself. And so some of those actually came from the audiobook reading.
Yeah, yeah. But you couldn't tell the difference, really. The
Yeah,
voice actor
the
did a
voice
very good
actor was
job.
very good. Yeah.
Yeah, very good job.
I just put that in the chat that Darnice sent to me, and it has like I think it's 184 movie references in Life Itself. So that'll keep you busy for a while.
Definitely, definitely. If anything, that one image where it was his office and all of the movie posters, which I'm sure Andy just drooled over and wants to do the same thing in his house.
I paused it there for several minutes.
I did too. I was just like, oh wow, look at that.
But by the way, Roger wrote 4 Russ Meyer movies, by the way, not just
Did he
Beyond the
really?
Valley of the Dolls. He
Oh.
wrote Up. He wrote Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens.
That's right. That's right.
And he wrote one other one that didn't get made, and the name escapes, Who Shot Bambi, which was supposed to be the Sex Pistols movie that never got made.
Oh, wow.
That Russ Meyer was supposed to make with Roger. But Roger made 3 movies, only one under his actual name, which was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which, Fox owned the title of, and Jacqueline Suzanne sued successfully and got paid for them using Valley of the Dolls. And Pam Grier was also in as her debut, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Yeah, that's the only reason I know that movie. But what was that one? Beneath the
Valley of the Ultra Vixens.
Oh,
and
my.
the other one's called Up. The third one's called Up, and they have Charles Napier, who was in a lot of movies by a lot of different people's movies. He's a big Jonathan Demme used him quite a bit, and he's also the voice of Duke on The Critic. If you watch that show, The Critic, when it was on, Siskel and Ebert did a show on The Critic, but they finally gave us what we wanted. They fought.
By the way, there are no Russ Meyer movies on Canopy, FYI. I'm
not surprised.
That doesn't surprise me either. So, the other 2 movies I mentioned are rather nasty.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah, they're pretty a moment of their product of their time.
That's true.
You don't have to sell me.
Well, I do have a copy of Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. I mentioned to Roger when I worked in the video store that someone rented it thinking it was porn, and I tried to dissuade them, and they came back and were so angry that they threw the video at me.
Oh no.
And it missed me, and it hit our security mirror, and all this glass rained down on me.
Gosh.
And I was like, Roger, your movie almost got me killed. He thought that was rather entertaining. Also, his movie came out 2 months after I was born. He also thought that was entertaining.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. I saw a hand up, but I didn't see. Okay, Bill, I'm sorry.
Bill B. Yeah.
Yeah, what Odie was just talking about reminded me of the very brief scene in the movie where Martin Scorsese's being interviewed, and he's trying desperately to find something nice to say about Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. He says, I did like the editing of when they kept going to the front, the Rolls Royce and the Bentley. And he says that was beautifully edited. The rest of the film, not so much.
Not so much.
So funny. So funny.
Oh man. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, let's go on with some recommendations. And I know we may have many recommendations. So I was thinking about how to approach this, and I thought rather than recommending films that are like Life Itself, I wanted to recommend some films that I was introduced to through Roger Ebert, either through his writing or through his television appearances. And these are films that I probably, except for one, I probably would never have known about aside from Roger Ebert. One of them is one we talked about last year, AGUIRRE, The Wrath of God from 1972. And again, we just talked about it last year, and so you can still see it. It's still on Canopy. But when Ebert originally reviewed it, not many people in this country had even heard of the film's director, Werner Herzog, who, as we talked about, makes an appearance in Life Itself. But Ebert championed the film, introducing Herzog to countless audiences. This one is, again, still on Canopy. And if you missed it, if you missed our discussion of it, I'm going to put that in the chat. And so you can check that out and see that. Of the next film, Ebert said this, and I apologize, this is a long quote with a few words that are changed. In 1962, the actor in this film represented everything I dreamed of attaining. He was a newspaper columnist. He frolicked with beautiful women. He stayed up all night drinking and partying. He raced about the city, witnessing colorful stories. He was a weary but romantic existential hero. 10 years later, he represented what I had become, at least to the degree that Chicago offered the opportunities of Rome. 10 years after that, in 1982, he was what I had escaped from after I stopped drinking too much and burning the candle at both ends. In 1992, he was a reckless young man with a weakness for romance. By 2002, he was the hero of a classic film more than 40 years old, and I had to lecture audiences on the virtues of black and white. By then, the actor was dead. And yet the film has not changed one frame in all those years. It is a tribute to its greatness that it still has the power to hold me. And that's the end of the quote. Ebert is talking about the actor Marcello Mastroianni and the masterwork La Dolce Vita, which is not on Canopy, but it is on DVD from the library. And I've always appreciated how Ebert looked at that film every 10 years. He probably looked at it more than every 10 years, but how he saw something different in his life every time that movie played. The film never changed, but his life did.
Interesting.
Ebert called this next film one of the most joyous movies he had ever seen. It's a documentary called Say Amen Somebody from 1982 that focuses on gospel music in the African American church, with particular attention to two gospel pioneers, Thomas A. Dorsey and Willie Mae Ford Smith. It is indeed a joyful movie, and it's on Canopy right now. And finally, a film in an ongoing documentary series that follows a group of 7-year-old British children, catching up with them and filming them every 7 years. And it is currently with them at the age of 63. The only film on Canopy from this series is 56 Up, which obviously catches these children at the age of 56, and they're not children anymore. It's a brilliant study of human nature, youth, aging, and so much more. If Roger Ebert had never mentioned this film, I probably never would have seen it, but I'm so glad that I have, and I hope you'll see it too. It's not in the library, but again, 56 Up is on Canopy. Okay, so what are your recommendations? Oh, we
I've got Ethan and Bruce.
Don't you dare steal my movie, Ethan.
I definitely won't, trust me.
Okay.
Keeping in this recommending movies that Roger introduced us to. I hope I'm getting my memory right. I don't know if I read his review after seeing the movie or saw it before. I hope it's before. But what my memory is telling me now is that there was a movie I really, 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 really wanted to watch. I think it was probably the summer of 2019. It might have been, maybe 2018, I'm not sure. It was this movie from Hong Kong by a director I had never heard of before, some kind of martial arts movie that seemed interesting. It was called Kung Fu Hustle. And I was doing a little bit of research, and I saw that Roger Ebert quoted when he saw it at Sundance, direct quote, that it is like Jackie Chan and Buster Keaton meet Quentin Tarantino and Bugs Bunny. And I was sold. And I watched Kung Fu Hustle as soon as I could, and I fell in love with it. And I still have extremely fond memories, and I'm still in the process of seeking out every other movie by the director, Stephen Chow. And I would recommend Kung Fu Hustle to anybody. It's a great action movie. It is a stellar comedy. Definitely one of the funniest movies I've seen. And Roger Ebert's quote perfectly sums it up. So thank you, Roger Ebert, for showing me Kung Fu Hustle.
All right. Thank you, Ethan.
I'm guessing that wasn't Bruce's choice. So go ahead, Bruce.
No, but I agree. That was actually a very, very good. It was a very entertaining and very good movie. I like that a lot. I'm actually going to throw my nickel on the grass for a documentary, Man on Wire. It is. I don't know if I would say one of the best documentaries I've ever seen. I don't know, but Man on Wire was just.
Would definitely think that you'd say that.
Yeah, it was captivating. It was absolutely captivating. The story, the telling of the story. The thing about a documentary is you normally know how it ends, but the tension that you carry in you when you're watching this, because of the way the story unfolds, it was just a great, and it did win Best Documentary Oscar.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruce. And I'll mention Odie put in the chat that you must see The Mermaid. That's also by Chow. Wale?
Yeah, I was going to mention Man on Wire too. I have a list of documentaries that I would probably never have heard of if not that in film schools, where there's some of the documentaries that we studied. So Man on Wire was the first one. Man on Wire, it played like a real movie. It's actually as exciting as any real movie. I think it's actually more exciting than the Hollywood movie that was made with just Gordon Levitt. The other documentaries are Thin Blue Line, Capturing the Freedmans, and Harlan County, USA. So I don't know if you need me to repeat. Do you need me to repeat those?
Let me have
I'll just post them in the chat.
Yeah, just post them in the back. I got Thin Blue Line, but I missed the other. And I know Harlan County, USA. I've heard that one too. Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
John, then Jan.
Yeah, I just have one documentary to recommend. I mean, there are many, but the one that is somewhat compatible with life itself came out in '78, I think, called Best Boy. I don't know if anyone's seen it or heard it. It's about a woman who, a widow. I think she's a widow. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, maybe the parents, they know they're getting old. They have a son who is mentally, I wouldn't say, I don't know what the correct term is now, but he's not fully developed mentally, a very sweet guy. And his cousin made this movie of their attempt to find a home for him before they die. And sounds like probably a very simple thing, but it's incredibly moving. And the characters, I remember the mother. I don't know if the father was there or not, but anyway, the parents and the best boy are really, really engaging people. And the story itself is very poignant because they're facing death. They know they're not going to live much longer, and they're really desperate, but in a very measured way to find a suitable place for their son, and they do. So it has a happy ending. And I saw it at the New York Film Festival, and the mother was there along with the best boy and the director. So the place was packed, and they got a really strong ovation. It was really quite a moving experience.
Great, thank you, John. I appreciate that.
Thank you, John.
Jan?
John, I haven't thought about Best Boy in decades. That is.
Did you like it?
Oh yes, that is such a moving documentary. I've got to go seek it out again. I haven't seen that in such a long time. I'd love to recommend to everybody that if you haven't watched Citizen Kane yet with the Roger Ebert commentary, please seek that out. You can buy Kane in a lot of different versions, so you can have it in your collection. The best is probably the new Criterion that has come out. Terrific commentary by Roger in that. I'd love to recommend a couple of new books. One of my favorite people in film is Buster Keaton. And amazingly, 2022 has seen 2 Buster Keaton books come out within about 3 or 4 weeks of each other. One is by Dana Stevens, who writes for Slate. It's called Cameraman. It's very interesting. It's not a biography. It talks about Buster in his role in film history in the context of the birth of the 20th century. Fascinating book, short book too. Then there is a new biography by James Curtis, who wrote the wonderful biographies of W.C. Fields, Spencer Tracy, and more. It is Buster Keaton, A Life, I think, and it is a beautiful new biography. It's everything you could hope to find about Buster Keaton. And Buster Keaton is alive and well on Canopy. You can watch a lot of his films on Canopy, and you should purchase many of these to have in your home collection.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jan.
Can I recommend a movie?
Sure.
Certainly can.
It's Roger. I mean, I don't know if I learned about it from Roger, but I definitely saw it. It's one of my favorite movies of the 80s. It's called The Mighty Quinn. And it's Denzel Washington in 89. He won the Oscar for Glory, but this, in my opinion, is the movie that put Denzel on the map. I don't think he's ever been sexier in any movie. That's a lot to say. It's a very strange film. It's about 81 minutes long, and it's packed with a lot of strange, it's a thriller, it's a comedy. Roger gave it 4 stars. He loved it. I love it. I wrote a piece on it. Denzel sings and proves that he couldn't do musicals. But it's a fascinating, it's a murder mystery, and so many other things happen. And it's one of these movies where you really have to listen to it, because everything is in the dialogue and everything is in the delivery and the relationships between these characters that are on this island. And Denzel plays a police officer who's investigating this murder, and there's Shirley Ralph and James Fox and Emmett Walsh, and you know he's not up to any good. No. If you know the actor, you know he's never up to any good. And it's a fascinating movie because of the way it's constructed, and when you watch it, you really do have to pay attention to what is being said, what's being told to you, because all the mystery of the movie is in it. It has a little bit of mysticism in it. Robert Townsend is also in. He plays the murder suspect. And it's just a fascinating movie. And Roger loved it because he loved movies that told stories and took him places he had never been before. So if you can find it, I think it's one of my favorite Denzel movies. Like I said, it's one of the best movies of the 80s. And I wish Denzel's funny in this. You know, he doesn't do much humor. So it's the loosest Denzel has ever been in a picture. And I think I will say this again, it's the sexiest he's ever been. So if you like Denzel, this is for you.
I do, and it is.
Thanks, Eddie.
I do love that. Thank you so much. I will mention, I put in a chat, but Best Boy is on Canopy. I was trying to look at some of the others. So you can watch it on Canopy. A couple of the others are not, but they are on in your library, so you can find those. But I appreciate all of these things. I feel like there's so many movies that I wanted to watch just because of the dynamics between the two of them. And I know that, you know, there were a lot of really, really bad movies, and I laugh because I remember seeing the review of Benji the Hunted, and I loved Benji, and I was like, you know what, don't dog the dog. It's a great, fun movie, and families will love it, and they did. But it was always those moments of like, they would do these great films, and then you'd find this like little quiet film or this little like family film, and you think, oh, what are you going to say about it? And it was always entertaining, whether you agreed with it or not. It was always entertaining. So I appreciate having this. Jan, did you have something else to say, or you had your hand up from before? Okay.
Just take it down. Okay.
All right. Well, we ran long on this one, and we could. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jan.
If you have one more minute, one of the funniest moments on Siskel and Ebert, and you can find this on YouTube, is when Gene is raking Pee-wee's Big Adventure over the coals. Absolutely hates it. And Roger just offhandedly says, you know, I haven't seen it yet, but watching that clip, Gene, I think I like it. He reminds me a little of Harold Lloyd. And Gene goes, "Oh my God, Roger."
Like, how dare you?
It like escalates from 0 to 100 in a second. And it's just a marvelous moment. It really is.
That I remember watching that when it aired, and I had not seen the movie, and I just couldn't believe the reaction. And Ebert's just, you know, just sitting there like, well, what? It does. It reminds me of Harold Lloyd. And it's like sacrilege to this.
How dare you?
By the way, Gene convinced Roger to change his review once, and Roger convinced Gene to change his review once as well. On the air, there's I'm trying to remember what movie it was, but Gene talked Roger into giving the movie that he'd given thumbs up, thumbs down.
Wow.
I mean, I think that was the whole point, right? That their conversations were about intelligence and the analysis and the really deep diving into it. And if you could convince me, I'd like to be convinced. But if you can't convince me, then, you know,
begrudgingly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You know, you have to. And it's also interesting to look at the movies that Roger didn't like. It's something to look at, you know, as an outside assignment. Roger didn't like A Clockwork Orange, for example, which is Chaz's favorite movie. And some of it's interesting going back and realizing that these Siskel and Ebert didn't like certain movies that you thought they would like. I mean, Gene didn't like Apocalypse Now. And I think Roger didn't like Full Metal Jacket. And so there's, you know, a bunch of movies that you'd be surprised when people write us and tell us that Roger would never give the review that we've written. We're like, we never know. Roger was always surprising you. You know, you couldn't make him binary by just saying, you know, he liked something or hated something. He would always surprise you, like Cop and a Half or some of these other horrible movies that he loved. You know, like you know, or sorry, Benji the Hunted. Sorry. I always thought Benji was boring as a kid. He was a boring dog. Oh my God, he was so boring.
Me too.
It's about the music and the journey, Odie. You had to be there.
Well, you can watch Oh Heavenly Dog, which is a very disturbing movie where Chevy Chase turns into Benji. It is not for children.
For sure.
Jeff.
Yeah, I don't remember what the movie was that they reviewed. They both hated it, but I remember them remarking on the show that they'd found out afterwards that one of the reels was missing of the print that they'd watched. And I think Siskel said, if the missing footage had been the missing footage from Magnificent Ambersons, this movie still would have sucked. I've always remembered that little exchange.
Nice.
Oh, did I see one other hand? I thought I saw one, but I don't see it now.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussion, which was a great discussion. And thank you for all the great recommendations. I feel like we're all either going to go buy one of Roger Ebert's books or go to his website. Again, just such a wealth of material there. Yeah, Odie's got a whole shelf right there. I have one too here. Such a wealth of great writing, great, you know, and if you don't know, I think most of the Siskel and Ebert shows are on YouTube somewhere. So you can find a lot of that stuff there and experience it all over again or for the first time. You know, continue to go to the website. I would like Dee was talking about, I would highly encourage someone to go to Ebert Interrupt Us, even though he's not there, but you can see what he has created and has continued. Ebert Fest. I mean, so many ways to celebrate the life of Roger Ebert and just enjoy the great gifts that he gave us all. And that's going to do it. So thank you all again. Oh, Darnice?
Oh, one thing I just wanted to mention too, the first documentary that Anna DuVernay mentioned, that I Will Follow, about her aunt, is also on Canopy, so you can see that too.
Just came up, I think, on Canopy, so that's good news. Very good.
Andy, before we close, can I ask Odie a question?
Sure.
Odie, have you ever seen Louisiana Story? Robert Flaherty.
I've heard of it, but I have not seen it.
Well, since you mentioned raccoon, you ought to watch it if you get a chance, because the boy who is the central character in it has a pet raccoon.
Well, Roger didn't notice, but when he gave me the assignment, when I was living at home, we had raccoons in our attic. And I slept in a bunk bed, so the raccoons would be about 4 feet above my head, making all this noise and racket. And it was terrifying. Of course, Roger didn't know that until he assigned me the piece. And I spent most of the time talking about how we watch nature documentaries, watch animals have sex. So then the first piece I wrote for AGUIRRE.com was a documentary, in fact. And just real quick, just to show how, one little story about Roger. My first assignment, it took me 9 hours to write that review because I was terrified. This is my idol. You say don't meet your heroes. And I eventually gave up, and I just said, I'm just going to write it like I write at my blog, So I wrote this review of a movie called Sleep Furiously. And I sent it to Roger, and I was like, this is it. I'm fired. And he published it. He ran it. And I wrote him, and I was like, I can't go through this again. I can't spend 9 hours agonizing over a review. So can you please tell me, how do I write for you? How do I write at AGUIRRE.com? And he wrote me back, and he said, you should write like Odie Henderson. And that was probably the best advice I ever got as a writer. And it was, again, a testament to Roger being so open with his mentorship and just being such a, a kind person, in terms of nurturing what he felt was talent.
That's a wonderful story.
And it's good advice for any writer, right like you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's also in the music world. I think Bill can attest to, if you're trying to play a song, they say, well, don't play it like that person, play it like you wrote it. And it's true. You're speaking to it. It reflects you. It has your soul in it, and it's more meaningful to you then, and therefore the readers or the listeners or the viewers.
And we see it in films too, somebody trying to be like Hitchcock. Nobody can be Hitchcock, just do your own film and do it the way you want to do it. You will have some Hitchcock influences, I'm sure, but make your own film.
Awesome.
Is Louisiana Story on Canopy? Any chance?
I don't know. Let me see. So the way that I do this is I actually go to the site called Just Watch, and that tells you where anything that you look up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
one of my favorite places.
I did that for my chef seminar to give people wherever, and we also have that on the site. If you look under the reviews, it tells you every place you can watch the movies that we're reviewing at AGUIRRE.com. Right. Even the movies that Roger reviewed, they also have the same site. It's an app. It's really good. I wish I'd written it.
No, Louisiana Story is available on Prime Video, though.
Okay, I can watch it there.
Okay, good.
Thank you for the recommendation.
All right. Well, we want to be mindful of our time. We have gone over, and I appreciate all of this, but it was worth it. I think all of it, and especially Odie. Thank you so much for your.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Odie, for all your stories and for just being here. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Wow. It's 8:30?
It's 8:30. Yeah, exactly.
Boy, my time card's going to look all messed up. They're not going to want to pay me for all this.
Same.
All right. Thank you guys all again for a wonderful evening. And I hope you stay safe. Watch a lot of great movies, a lot of the ones that we've discussed tonight. And I will see you on April the 1st for Beat the Devil. And I'm prepared for you to throw tomatoes at me or whatever.
But I've seen it. It's weird, people. Get ready.
We have such good watchers here, and they all have very varied opinions on many of the things that we watch. So, I don't know. Is it weirder than Seconds?
Yes. Well,
Is it?
Yeah. I wrote a piece. I wrote a piece on it because I cover Noir City. In fact, I'm wearing a Noir City t-shirt. And I've written a lot of pieces about Noir, and I saw it at Noir City. And it is, even if I told you what it was about, I couldn't spoil it for you because.
Yeah.
Well, let me put it this way, just real quick. Those Adam Sandler movies where he takes all of his friends and they go to an island or something, they make a movie just for the vacation? Beat the Devil is that, but John Huston taking all of his friends to a location to make a movie. It's a lot better than Adam Sandler movies, but think about that when you watch it. It might make a little more sense.
That's a very good point. Very well put. So anyway, we'll have a great discussion about it, no matter whether you liked it or didn't like it. It'll be a fun discussion. So until then, I will see you guys. Take care. Watch some great movies.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
night. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Take care.